Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth,
where we're exploring all sorts of business topics. Experts from around the world join me, your host, Diane Helbig, for a conversation where they share their expertise with all of you. Take what you need when you need it. Featured on Inc.com, Forbes, and MSNBC's Your Business, this podcast is recognized as one of the best podcasts for small business, sales, leadership, social media, and more. When it comes to business, Accelerate Your Business Growth has got it covered. And now on with the show. My guest today is Jason Kramer. Jason founded Cultivise, a consulting firm that specializes in B2B lead nurturing strategies and technology after identifying revenue gaps in marketing and sales funnels for his business-to-business clients while running his own creative agency for 15 years. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jason.
Thanks, Diane. Happy to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. Will you explain to the listeners what the difference is between paying for lead generation and engaging in lead nurturing activities?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. And love we're starting this way. So lead generation, when you're paying, think of Google AdWords, think of LinkedIn marketing, think of even maybe unconventional things, going to trade shows and you're paying to get people to come to your booth, right? So any mechanism where you're paying to meet somebody new that's coming into your world, I would consider as an inbound paid lead gen effort. Okay. Even on the email side, there's lots of companies now, which has been very popular for the last decade and more, of cold email solicitation. You're buying lists, you're sending out emails, hoping that somebody responds to that to inquire about what you're doing. Now, that is very different than the world of lead nurturing. Lead nurturing is they've already come into your world. So let's play the scenario where they've come to your website and they filled out a form to download a piece of content. They've signed up for your newsletter, or maybe even perhaps they've spoken to somebody or seen a demo, but they're not quite ready to buy. The idea and concept behind lead nurturing is to educate and inform that person through the life cycle of the sales cycle. And what that means is if it takes typically 6 months to make a decision or win a business for your company, what are you doing over that 6-month period to continually inform, educate, and be top of mind to the prospect? And what we find is a lot of companies aren't doing that. They'll have those upfront conversations and they'll sort of sit back and wait for somebody to raise their hand and say, okay, I'd like more info or I'm ready to make a decision. And so it's really important to have that process, as we call lead nurturing, to keep them informed and stay in front of them during that whole sales cycle.
Yeah, boy, that really, it's interesting. Thank you for explaining that. And it is interesting that so many people do that. They sort of let the prospect lead the process, right, instead of making sure that they're engaging. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are on why it's so important for the company to continue to nurture those relationships as opposed to saying to themselves, well, when they're ready, they'll reach out.
That's another great question. So the reality is this, right? Everybody that's in the market, regardless of what you're buying, okay, you're more than likely going to make that decision at some point. Now, they may not be for a few months or a few years, but ultimately, if you're researching, well, we can even talk about CRM, that's our world. So let's say you're looking for a new CRM platform. There's a lot that goes into that decision. So it's certainly not going to happen overnight. So what happens to the companies that don't do the nurturing is that by the time that prospect is ready to make a decision, if it's been more than several months, they probably forgot about you, right? Mm-hmm. Because you, even as good of an impression you made in those first couple of conversations, they've probably spoken to a half a dozen or more other companies of your competitors after they stopped talking to you. And so they're going to be most comfortable to make a decision with who are they talking to now, that makes them feel all nice, warm and fuzzy, and addresses their concerns and really speaks to them, to the pain points they're having. And so I think it's a very, call it old school way of thinking, to sit back and say, okay, well, when they're ready, they'll call us. I mean, that's really wishful thinking that almost never happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So I totally agree with you. And there are people who struggle with feeling like they're pestering someone, right? Like they're contacting them too often. So what are like the different types of follow-ups and touches that you think make sense and can avoid that sort of feeling?
Yeah. Well, so first off, you have to be sensitive. I mean, if you keep on, leaving a voicemail every week or sending an email every other week, when can we speak again? When can we talk? More, can I send you pricing? I mean, that's being way too pushy, and in the things of how things have changed in the last, even 15, 20 years, really now the buyer is in control. It's not the old days where the seller is doing a nice presentation, or there's a whole sales process that they can follow. It's really now in the control of the buyer. And so you have to adjust and accommodate to that. I personally think that in the beginning stages, it's okay to reach out every couple of weeks, let's say 2 weeks or so, just to provide, again, information and not ask for a meeting per se, right? So it's, we understand that you might have this problem. Here's how we've helped solve this problem for other companies like yours. Maybe here's a case study of how we've done that. Here's proof and credibility that what I'm trying to explain and offer to you, we've actually done before, and we really do know what we're talking about. I think the other thing that people often don't leverage is things outside of email, right? So every salesperson hopefully is comfortable enough, with their own, I guess, personality, you can say, Dan, is calling on the phone, right? Reaching out, leaving a voicemail. But what do you say on that voicemail that doesn't come across as, quote unquote, salesy, right? And how do you, and maybe it's you thinking about something. Maybe they're a sports fan and there was a great, basketball game on last night. Hey, I was watching the game. I was thinking of you. Did you happen to watch the game? And that's the voicemail. Like, it's not asking or mentioning anything else. It's just another touch point. LinkedIn, right? You and I are both on LinkedIn a lot, I know. Yeah. LinkedIn is a great resource too. It doesn't have to be, again, a automated drip email or asking for that meeting. Maybe you found an article on LinkedIn you think they would like, and maybe you just comment on that article and link their name to it. So in their own LinkedIn app, it pops up that you've tagged them in the article, right? It's just being there as a resource, I think, are all ways that shows that you're in it to help them and not in it for yourself just to close a sale.
Yeah, I love those. And one of the things that I am hearing, or that I'm picking up from this, is be yourself, be more on the relationship side of things. Like, if you let go of the whole being attached to an outcome, then you show up more authentically and comfortably, I guess is the word. And so it's easier. You're really making it easier for the other person to continue to engage and interact.
Yeah. I mean, think about your personal relationships, for those listening, who are you friends with, right? And who do you enjoy hanging out with and socializing with? And it's people that it's easy to talk to. Maybe they're funny. Maybe they're smart. Maybe they are into the same things you're into, right? There's all different scenarios. So my approach, and I think it's an approach that a lot of companies are starting to take for years, it's nothing new, is build that connection. Because ultimately, if they like you as a person, you've just ramped up your ability to solidify that deal and have a more likelihood that they're going to want to do business with you, because they want to do business with you. They want to have that relationship with you. And so if you can start that rapport in a genuine, authentic way, I think that really says a lot about, who the company has working for them and the approach that they're taking to growing these relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's so much easier, and
It
more
is.
comfortable.
It is, but let's be honest though, there's also the hurdle of a lot of companies have, high quota and demand for their sales
Yeah.
team, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you don't have the luxury and they're like, Jason, you got to make 50 calls a day. I don't care what's going on, how you feel. We want to make sure you make 50 calls. Well, how genuine can you be, when
Right.
it's all about volume and not quality, right?
Yep.
So it,
Yep.
it becomes a little bit more challenging, if you were in a role like that. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does make it a little bit more complicated.
It does for sure. But those companies need to realize that what they're trying to make their salespeople do doesn't work.
Right.
So, right.
Well, that's a whole lot of
I know.
podcast
I was
topic.
just going to say that. So true. All right. Talk to us about automation because I can hear some of the listeners, those like small business owners going, okay, yeah, seriously. Like,
Right.
I don't have time to do
Yeah.
all of this.
Nor do I have an assistant to help me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So how does automation fit into all of this?
Sure. So a lot of CRMs these days have automation capabilities built in. There's tools out there where this cadence is already either pre-built or could easily be built. And by a cadence, if those aren't familiar with the term, essentially it's a series of events that happen over a predetermined set of time. So for an example, you might have a automation that says on day one, make a phone call. On day 10, send an email, but send this specific email that's already been written. Here's the template. All you have to do is hit send or personalize. Then it says, wait 2 weeks and reach out on LinkedIn, right? So it's basically scripting the entire sales outreach process for you. And this way, you're not creating tasks. You're not having to remember, oh, when was the last time I spoke to Jason? When do I have to call him back? It's doing that for you so that you can stay in front of them. And typically, what we recommend when we build these workflows is there should be a minimum of a touch point at least 1 times to 2 times a month, depending upon where they are in the sales cycle, for the length of the sales cycle. So if you have a year-long sales cycle, at a very minimum, there should be 12 touch points, usually a few more ones with increase, or I should say a decrease between them at the beginning start of the sales cycle, right? So you want to try to build that rapport. But if you've noticed after a couple of months, they're not really responding, it's okay to taper off a little bit. And by having these workflows built and using automation, well, now all of a sudden you do have an assistant working for you, but it's technology working for you. It's not having to pay somebody thousands of dollars, a year to be an assistant that your company may not be able to afford.
Right. Right. That's really interesting. And I like that it's not bombarding people with messages. It's, it's
Yeah.
paced.
Right. And now, not to go the rabbit hole, but the one thing to keep in mind with all of this, technology is only as good as the content and the strategy, right? So the one thing I would offer just to think about for the listeners today is what type of communication are you already using? What do your emails say? How are you reaching out on LinkedIn? What do your voicemails sound like? Even call your spouse and leave a voicemail for them as if you were pitching, right? And then listen to that and say, well, would I respond to myself, as the recipient on the other end of that message? Because what we often see, and this is all part of it, a lot of times the salesperson is left to develop their own content. And I think that's very dangerous because a salesperson may not be the best articulating person when it comes to writing email content. I've often seen a lot of times, even just for companies that send out a lot of quotes, the subject is following up on the quote. Like there's no value add, right?
Right.
It's all just matter of fact, very direct. And for those that are listening that are sales managers, my question would be to them is, when was the last time you looked at the communication your team is using on behalf of the company? When have you reviewed the emails they're sending out, the voicemails they're leaving? When have you listened in on their sales calls? A lot of sales managers are just kind of in the dark. They either don't think about checking those things, or it's not the way that they run their company and the department. But I would challenge them to say you would definitely see a big improvement if you were more involved in looking at all that material.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's being a resource as opposed to just a activity monitor, right? Instead of
Right.
just being a hall monitor.
Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, 30 calls a day and 30 bad calls a day and 30 good calls a day is a world of difference.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. All right. And how do you decide like which messages to send, like to potential customers versus actual customers? Is there some sort of a playbook?
There is, which is highly customized, but the high level overview of that playbook is we talked before at the very beginning of the conversation, Diane, about lead gen versus lead nurturing.
Yeah.
Lead gen can be very expensive, right? You're doing AdWords, you're going to a trade show, you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars, to do that. Not every company has that perhaps capacity, or they're investing other places. What companies don't realize is there's an untapped resource to go to their existing customers, which I'm glad you brought that up, to resell and cross-sell those customers.
Yeah.
Many companies, especially in the B2B space, typically offer multiple services or products, and that past customer may have bought 5% of what they actually offer. And the customer may not even realize that everything else that they offer could be of value to them. So a lot of times we encourage when we start working with companies is let's look at the existing data you have, your existing customers, past customers, even those that you tried to sell to that never closed. You can still potentially go back to them and try to resell them, right? With a different angle, a different messaging, a different offer. And so that's where we usually start that process. But the playbook is a few pieces. I mean, one is technology. There has to be something involved from a CRM sales tool perspective. So helping looking and identifying what that technology is. And if it's in place, great. Is it working? Can we tweak it? If it's not, let's get something in there. Another piece of the playbook certainly is the buy-in from the company. Having that champion, having that cheerleader who is going to stand behind the troops, so to speak, and rally them to not only use this new process that we're talking about today, but they're going to use it themselves, right? They're going to go in there and they're going to use it for reporting. Like they're not just going to say, hey, go do this without doing it themselves.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we find that person. And then, of course, there's all the other moving pieces, right? So it's the content, the emails, tying things into the website. In fact, and we'll get to a little bit later, but the listeners can actually download a free playbook we have that we've written, which is almost a 15-page playbook that really could be applied to any business. And it gives the framework for all these different moving pieces and how to actually apply them, to the company.
Wow. That's awesome. We will make sure we get to that. Now,
Yes.
Talk to me about segmenting your contact list. Why is it important, and how should we be doing that?
Okay. Very, very important. For all those listening today, think about the newsletter you might be emailing out, whether it be a monthly newsletter, weekly, quarterly. Is that going to just one list of contacts you have? Or are you sending a different message to different segments in that list? And most companies are sending the exact same message to the exact same people.
Yeah.
Which we all know doesn't work.
Nope.
And even you might have, a 30, 40% open rate. We challenge companies to say, well, it's not so much about the open rate or even the click rate, but what's the net ROI? Did those people actually buy something from you? Did they download something that you wanted them to download? Was there an actual end result action beyond just open and clicks? And so I'll give a story really quick. We had worked with a museum who had roughly about maybe 30,000 people in their database that they were emailing to on a pretty frequent basis. And the list was all gumbled together. So it had donors, it had past members, active members, people that just walked in as a guest, people that had birthday parties for the kids there that weren't even a member. And as a result, the email they would send was extremely long, was very convoluted. It wasn't directing to one particular message or action because everybody was on the list. And so therefore, they weren't getting those results they were looking for. We came in, we cleaned that up and we said, okay, well, an email should go out just to donors. It should go out to people that walked into the museum for a one-day visit and encourage them to why the value of joining and signing up. The same goes for the people that came in for a birthday party. You have their data, right? You can go and try to resolicit them to come back to the museum, maybe for a free day pass. So there's all these different things you could do when that messaging is more specific. The easiest way to segment data, Diane, is really if you have good data, right? So let's face it, a lot of companies have first name, last name, email, maybe company.
Yeah.
Maybe you're lucky and you have industry and title, perhaps.
Right.
Maybe your business based on geography, so you know what state or city they're in. So those are all things that could be used. But then you dive down a little bit deeper and you start thinking about who do we sell to, right? Who is our target audience and how can we decipher our list that we have to fit into that target? I'll give you an example. In our world at Cultivise, we talk to marketing people and we talk to salespeople. The messaging and the pain points is different for those two groups of people. So even though we might be trying to sell them ultimately the same thing, we're going to talk to marketing people differently than we're going to talk to salespeople. So in our database, we have identified who are the CMOs, the chief marketing officers, marketing VPs, et cetera, versus the sales leaders, because we want our messaging to be slightly different. Now, in certain CRMs, and this will be one thing I'll wrap this piece up, is there's something called dynamic content, which is a feature a lot of companies don't even know exists. And what dynamic content is, very simply, have you ever, Diane, gotten a postcard maybe from a hotel or resort and your name looks like it's been written in the sand? Have you ever seen anything like that? Or a box of, okay, great. Yeah. So that's called variable data. So in the printing world, that's been going on for 30 years or more, where they're able to modify graphics and photographs to look like it's customized for you. Well, in the world of email marketing, we can do that too. And so we can change out graphics, we can change out language, we could change out subject messages, we can change out all this content based on information we know about the individual person receiving the email. Now think about that. Each person is getting a customized email to them based on data you know about them, versus sending the exact same message and design to every single person in your database. It's very powerful.
Huge. I think this is so unbelievably important. I know that I get emails, these email, mass emails, whatever, and just from the subject line, I know they're sending it to everybody on their list.
Right.
Right? Because it doesn't pertain to me at all. And so, I don't open them. Doesn't do anything for me, and it's not moving me toward engaging with that organization. So I think this is a huge piece of this whole puzzle.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So I love this conversation. I think you've really offered such great information for the listeners. And what's the word I'm looking for? That it's not as scary. Let's say it that way. That it seems more manageable, doable, however you want to say it. Do you think, or maybe I should ask this question differently, how do you think, if you do, that AI is playing a role in the lead nurturing field? And just what are your thoughts on the positives or negatives of that?
Yeah. Well, all right. So think of AI, the way I think of it is driving a car, right? So you can get great mileage. You can get from point A to point B as the driver of that car. The car, unless it's a Tesla with someone sitting in it, isn't going to drive itself, right? But
yeah,
we all know, right? Technology is ramping up even in vehicles. So maybe not the best example, but the point is that AI is an amazing tool. ChatGPT, there's even AI on LinkedIn I've been seeing where, if you don't know what to say as a comment, it'll give you, different options. So you could just click a button and be like, oh, I want my comment to be a little bit more provocative, or I want it to be more techie, right? And then AI will actually write, an insightful comment, that you can post, right? To make it easier. Now, those are all good things, but it's how to use them, and how to apply them to what you do. to make it, again, we talked before earlier on more than one occasion about authenticity.
Yeah.
So the challenge with AI is you can't just rely on AI to do all the work for you. There has to be some human element, typically of yourself or your team, to weigh in and to influence what the AI is doing. There are some really great prompts out there for those using ChatGPT, 3.5 or 4, which is even better. I know you got to pay for it, but it is a lot better than the free one. But even looking at what the prompts are, because it's knowing what to ask the AI to do is equally as important is should we use AI at all, right? Or not for this particular task.
Yeah.
And so, for example, right? So we're doing a podcast today. Well, the podcast that I attend, right, once it gets published, I like to kind of reciprocate, put something out on social media, put a post on our website. So I have all these different prompts set up to use AI to help me navigate. So it takes the transcript, it listens to the podcast, the conversation. It'll create a small takeaway of what that conversation was about. Maybe pull out a couple of quotes, and it'll do all those things because I've told it what it is that I exactly want it to do. Right? I didn't just say create a blog post from this interview because that would have been way too generic. I prompted it for very specific things to look for and to ask it to do. And by having that template, I can then rinse and repeat and do that over and over with a lot more speed and efficiency. So I would just think of AI as, leaving the listeners to know that it's a very powerful tool. There's lots of AI out there. Some of it's good, some of it's not good. But at the end of the day, you have to think to yourself, what am I using this for?
Yeah.
And if I would actually write this video, write this message, whatever it is, does this sound like me? That's I think the most important thing is like, does it sound like you and does it feel authentic?
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm so glad I asked the question. I could not agree more. It's a great tool, but you still need to make sure that you're using it effectively and for what you're trying to accomplish with it. Like you really have to have that understanding. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, Jason, this was great. Will you tell the listeners how they can find you and about that playbook that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Jason Lee, which is spelled Leigh Kramer. So you can find me there. Our website, Cultivise, Cultivize. But all the resources, the playbook, we also offer a free email delivery diagnostics for the listeners today, as well as some other giveaways, can all be found at afterthelead.com. So that's afterthelead.com. And there's a lot of great resources there for everybody listening today.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will make sure that's in the show notes.
Absolutely. I'm available. So the other thing too, Diane, just for your listeners, if anybody has any questions, our phone number is on the website. You call that number, which is 845-201-9353. You're going to get me on the phone. So you're not going to be handed off to someone else, even though we do have a team. I speak to every person that comes in, the door, so to speak, if you will, that virtual door. No one's coming in person these days. Let's be realistic about that. But that's what I talk about on this show today about the education is really, dear to us, and it's how I want to be treated when I'm looking, at a company to buy something. And so, it's not uncommon where I might spend a couple of hours, and no charge talking to somebody, just trying to help them navigate, through what it is they're trying to find out. That's
really great. It's really great. And this is just really valuable information, especially as the whole landscape continues to evolve and be more and more focused on relationships and really knowing our customers and knowing our prospects and providing them with information and really speaking to them based on who they are individually. So this is great. Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
And listeners, thank you. You are who we're doing this for. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Discover more episodes of this podcast and explore others at evergreenpodcast.com. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And if you're looking to get your sales strategy headed in the right direction, pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
The Jim Stroud Podcast explores the discoveries and trends forming the future of our lives. Brain-to-brain communication, robot bosses, microchip implants for workers, and artificial intelligence replacing human workers are all happening now. If you want to know what's happening next, subscribe now to the Jim Stroud Podcast.